So, what about the idea that you were telling us about the piece of the heart? You could cut off a piece of the heart, and it would actually give it to somebody who would recognize, a doctor who would recognize it as a part of the brain, or have resonance.
It would appear to be brain tissue.
And this is like a medical fact, right?
It's a medical fact. And there's a very good book that anyone who has a child that doesn't read this book should be jailed. I'm serious. It's called The Magical Child by Joseph Chilton Pearce, P-E-A-R-C-E. And he has follow-up books on it. For example, The Magical Child Matures tells you why that no center city fatherless child is ever going to amount to anything, ever. They can't, because their brain doesn't form properly.
Really?
Yep.
A fatherless child.
Well, or motherless.
A
child that's raised outside of a normal family environment, let's put it that way. That's much more accurate. And it'll tell you why that can't happen, why they can't really become useful to society.
Well, is this the thing you were telling us about the heart, being close to the heart?
Part of it, that's part of it. That's just part of it. There are a number of different factors. But one of the things that Pearce writes about in The Magical Child is, for example, that during the first 16 days or so after the amniotic fluid breaks, the child is exposed to electromagnetic field from the mother's heart beating, and that field is modulated by what's in the brain cells in the heart, which are the emotions, and those emotions are transferred to the child. So they thought, well, that may be true, so they went to Europe, where a lot of women have their children raised by wet nurses who nurse them on their breast, and they find out that the child takes on the emotional content of the wet nurse. Or children who are raised without a father never get the male emotions from the father, as compared to the female emotions.
It happens in the first 16 days. After that,
the greater part of it happens within the first 16 to 18 days.
Incredible.
And it turns out, for example, the Russians did brilliant and massive research on this, found out that if the child is born underwater in a fluid, remember the child's already in a fluid, it isn't going to hurt him to be underwater for a while. The child's born underwater in a fluid about body temperature and moved up with contact with the mother to the breast, where if you look at how you would naturally hold your arms and nurture a child, the heart of the mother and the heart of the child are going to be right next to each other. The child starts picking things up. If the child is kept in that position for the first 12 to 14 hours, the child usually develops speech by 6 months of age, and is able to stand on their own at 6 months of age.
Can you talk about that Russian doctor?
I unfortunately, I could if I remember his name. I can't remember his name. He was brought to the United States, and I can tell you that his techniques were used by Madonna in having her children.
But we're talking about generating an IQ as high as 275.
Right. I can tell you that her children are some of the most brilliant children on the face of the earth because of that. I know that she worked for using those techniques for a year to a year and a half before they were conceived, just to become ready. And that could well be privileged information, but it leaked out to me.
So you're saying that
the
heart has an information field component which somehow entrains the formation
No,
of
I'm not saying anything about information field. I'm saying the heart has an electromagnetic component that is there because the heart beats, and it takes a large electrical current to beat the heart.
Okay.
Anything the body is bioelectric. Anything near a magnetic field or an electric field that's conductive then has components that come from the things around it that are electric or magnetic or conductive.
Okay.
So you can see that stuff in the heart field. The information, not the information field, the information transfers to just like programming a ROM chip, transfers to the heart of the child. And as an example, one of the final proofs of this is there was a man who absolutely hated the odor, the sight, and the taste of mustard, and got a heart transplant, and all of a sudden couldn't get enough mustard. And just by happenstance, the wife of the donor somehow got word to him that her husband loved mustard, and so he had the heart. That came along with it. Number of people were, in essence, SOBs, or were very tense individuals, and they got a heart from a man who was a very calm man, and all of a sudden their wife and their children didn't even know who they were. They were a completely different person. That information was encoded in there, and when the nerves were sewn together and some of them grew back, that information got out of the heart, and it may well be that the magnetic field of the heart transmitted and the brain picked it up. I don't know that, but I know that we instrumented people's hearts and would let them see things that would excite them. The heart rate picks up, adrenaline's produced. Maybe what they see, anger, causes anger or fear. And if you anesthetize that part of the heart, then they have they don't have those fears and those angers and so forth. So that emotional information and some things like preferences in flavor or color, are transferred and transmitted in there. So it's very important to get the child up into a nurturing position. Children who were nurtured by both mother and father have both male and female components. Children nurtured by one or the other have only the one component of their emotional makeup.
And it's the first 16 days that does it.
Well, read the book. The greater part of it occurs in the first 16 to 18 days. And yes, maybe that's 30%. Maybe another 10% occurs in the next 50 days. Maybe another 10% in the next 180 days.
Okay, but very early on.
Very early on, you want to get that in there very early on.
Okay, I want to go in another direction.
Is there any other tissue in the body besides the heart that acts like neurological tissue?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Now you can, if you want, you can call, the pineal part of the brain, even though it doesn't do brain function. It's part of the brain. The pineal and pituitary are mostly melanin, a substance called melanin. Melanin, a type of melanin, makes the skin pigment. But they're a slightly different kind of melanin, and I've, in my research, have found that the melanin in the pineal, which in Eastern medicine is the third eye, the seat of the third eye, is very, very, very good at picking up informational signals and adding a time content to them, thus subtracting a non-time content. And so it's always been attributed to clairvoyance and clairaudience and so forth. Those are signals that are taken out of a signal that appears to be everywhere, every when. It coheres that for the person, and they have certain abilities that they wouldn't have. The Tibetans drill a hole in the front of the forehead with a little rock drill, and then they poke a bamboo skewer in and manipulate the pineal to quote-unquote open the third eye. And what it does is it gives it a hole through the Faraday cage, speaking in science terms, and it makes a sensitivity by making a piece of scar tissue that opens up or opens the third eye or opens clairvoyance or clairaudience or remote viewing or remote influencing or a number of different things.
Isn't it true that fluoride deadens or hardens the pineal gland?
Absolutely.
And since we have fluoride in our water, isn't there a sort of basically you could look at that as an Illuminati plot to deaden the intelligence and the psychic ability of the
What I